Well, hey there everyone. So this week, so I was helping my sister come up with looks for the Ren Fair, and so I kind of got inspired again to make another Ren Fair look. So that's what we're gonna do. So I was scrolling Pinterest, and I happened upon a photo of the most adorable corset I had ever seen. So that was wherever this is, and pretty much it's just like a patchwork corset, but it gave me like cottagecore and like hobbity vibes. So that's exactly what I'm going to be doing this week, is I'm going to make another Ren Fair look. So I'm going to make a new corset, a new chemise to go underneath it, and then maybe a new skirt if I can find. Maybe I'll go out and find like a nice material to make another skirt out of. But for now, also allotted for time. So for now, we're just gonna do the corset and the chemise, and if I have more time, and the material, I will make a skirt. So that's kind of our plan. So you can see in the picture for the corset, it kind of looks like, so there's like squares of 8 materials that go around, and then you just take multiples of those squares and sew them together, and then that's how you make the material for this corset. I scavenged these from my mom's quilting materials, so I'm gonna be doing this kind of vibe for my corset. I'll just go through and show a bit of these. Yeah, and in a second I will show you a bit of how I did the quilting or the patchwork pattern. Yeah, it's very much, I just love greens. I'm so drawn to greens. But I did throw a pink in there, so it's a little bit different than everything else I've made. Okay, so we're gonna start with the corset. So it's going to be the same, I don't know if you can see that, but that corset right there that I made a few videos ago that I did actually wear to the last Ren Fair. I'm going to do that same style of corset, but I'm going to change it up a bit. So that one was in like pieces that were all sewn together. So I'm going to redraw out that pattern to be the same shape, but only have like the one front panel and the one like back panel, rather than all of the sewn together pieces, and then plus the arms. But for today, I'm just gonna spend hours and hours cutting and sewing a bunch of triangles together. This is gonna take all day. So I think what I've measured for the corset is that I need to have, I think, so if I have squares that are like this big, I need to sew at least 4 of those together, and that gives me 1 panel. So I need to do that 4 times so that I can have 2 front panels and then 1 back panel on a fold. So that should be, what's math? 16 squares plus probably 2 more sets of squares for one of the arms, so 4 of those. So I need to make 20? Yeah, I need to make 20 sets of these squares, I believe. So this is gonna be a long day of just sewing things together. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you what I have patterned out for my little squares. So this is the pattern that I have. I've labeled all of these, and I need to cut out each one of these. Ooh, how many times? So I have 8 materials here. So pretty much what I need to do is I need to designate a triangle for each of the materials, and then cut out 20 of those triangles. And then once I have all of those pieces, they can all be sewn together. So I had drawn this to be like a fitted together square, but obviously I need seam allowance. So I'm going to be doing a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I put these little magnets which measure to a 1/4 inch. And so while I'm cutting, I can match that up and have that 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then over here, I have put on a quilting foot, so that has this little blade here, so that when my material feeds through, it will go along that blade and measure a 1/4 inch. So that's what we're doing this week. Let's go ahead and get started cutting a lot of things out. Alright, all of the pieces are cut out, and that is only half the battle because now I have to sew all of these 20 squares together and then sew those squares together. But I think that is a pretty cute, pattern. I think that's going to be really cute for my corset. So now I have to start sewing them together. Wish me luck. Okay, so here is how I'm going to sew this whole thing together. So I have my 8 little triangles, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to first take triangles 1 and 2 and then fold those right sides together, sew it down that one side. So then I have that one piece there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 2 triangles, 3 and 8, and then I'm going to sew those right sides together onto that little triangle, and then that gives me half of a piece. So we're going to work in halves here because that is the easiest to sew this together. So once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and leave that half alone and then work on this other half where we're going to take 5 and 6 and sew those right sides together like that. And then once that's sewn together, we're going to take 4 and 7 and again sew them right sides together to that half. So then we have 2 separate halves here. We're going to take this half and fold it right sides together and sew it along this line here, and that will give us a completed square. So that's how I'm going to do it for all of these squares. And then once I do that, then I can take all the squares and then sew them right sides together, which I'll show later, and I will get a full panel. So again, triangles 1 and 2 are going to be sewn together. And then once that's all ironed flat, we can go ahead and take numbers 3 and 8 and sew those to the 1 and 2 triangle. Now working on the other half of the square, we're going to take triangles 5 and 6 and sew those right sides together. Then once those are ironed, I can go ahead and take triangles 7 and 4 and sew those to the 5 and 6 triangle. Alright, so it's the next day and I did not get as far as I wanted to. So I do have this half of the square done. And then over here I'm working on the second half. I still have a bit to go. And then once I get this half done, then I can sew that to the other half. And then I can sew the squares together to get the panels for what I need to cut out the corset parts. So we're just gonna keep chugging along and hopefully get a lot more done today than I did yesterday. And I think if I work hard enough, I can maybe start at least cutting out the corset pieces. So let's get to it. Now that we have our two halves, we're going to take the top half and the bottom half and place them right sides together and sew along. And then you'll see that I do trim the edge of this before I sew it, just because it gives me a cleaner sew and the blade won't get in the way of all of these poking out edges. So I just go ahead and chop them off. Now that I have all my squares, it's time to start making some panels. So these panels are going to be made of 4 squares, at least for the front bodice pieces. So I need to make 2 of those. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 squares on the top and sew them right sides together, and 2 squares on the bottom, sew them right sides together. And then once I have those 2 halves, I can fold it up and then place them right sides together and sew along that whole thing. And that gives me a whole panel. Now to make the pattern for the corset, again, I'm just taking my already made corset and just tracing over what I have already sewn so that I only have the one front bodice piece and the one back bodice piece on a fold. And then finally I can cut out my front bodice piece on this panel. And then I went ahead and I cut out an interfacing because this whole outer layer is going to get interfacing to enclose all of these seams. Now, for the other front bodice piece, since we did not cut 2 layers at once, it is important to remember and to remind myself that I needed to reverse this pattern. So I needed to flip it over so that I do have 2 sides of the front bodice piece. And then for the back bodice piece, I ended up only needing 6 squares rather than 8. So I just took the 6 squares and sewed them all together and then folded it so that I could cut out this back bodice piece on a fold. And then that also gets an interfacing. And then for the straps, I ended up only needing 2 of the squares sewn together because I could fit both of these strap pieces on that one little block. So I ended up with actually 4 extra quilted squares that I might do something with later. Now that we finally have all of our outer bodice pieces cut out, it is time to cut out the lining. So I'm just going to cut it out of this cotton that I did use for one of the materials of the quilting. And I'm just going to cut out all of these pieces. And now it is finally time to start sewing things together. So for both the outer fabric and the lining piece, we're going to take the front bodice pieces and put them right sides together and sew them along the sides. And we're also going to take the strap pieces, placing it right sides together and sew it down that little side. And once we have the 2 completed outer fabric and lining pieces, we're going to place them right sides together and then pin it so that we can sew all the way around except for the bottom. Once the corners get clipped and the curves get clipped, we can turn it right sides out and iron it. And then I'm just going to do a little structural stitch on the outside of all of this bodice, measuring to 1/4 inch with the quilting foot. And now we can finally start sewing our boning channels and our grommet channels. So it's just going to be 2 structural ones down the front of the side, and then some other structural ones down the other seams, and some diagonals at the front. Once the boning is put in, I can go ahead and put the bias tape on the bottom and then put the grommets on, and then this bad boy is done and we can move on to the chemise. Okay, it is day 3 and we are now finished with the corset, which was the biggest part of this project. Here this bad boy is. She turned out so pretty. Okay, so now we are on to the chemise portion. I did not have the time nor the material to do a skirt, so I'm probably just going to throw on a skirt that I already have. But for the chemise, I picked up a curtain from Goodwill, and it's just like a nice tan, but the reason I picked it is because I liked the like linen-y feel of it. Like you can see it's pretty thin. So I really liked that material, and I think the browns go with the other browns that are in the little pieces of the corset. So that's what I'm gonna do. So for the pattern, I got a pattern from this lovely person on Etsy. It's a little different than the ones that I've done before. So it's gonna have like a drawstring for the neckline so that I can have it up here or down on the shoulders if I want. And then the rest is just gonna be big and flowy. So I am going to alter the pattern a bit. Because I don't want long arms for these sleeves. So instead I'm gonna have like poofy sleeves ending about here, and then just like, you'll see how I change it, but the original pattern has a drawstring around the cuff and that's how it tightens, but I'm not gonna do that for the arms. I'm just gonna like stretch elastic and sew it down. So that's what I'm gonna do for the arms. You'll see how I do that a bit later, and I'm obviously going to shorten them significantly. So it looks like, according to the pattern, I'm going to likely start with the bodice first. So since it has a little like split down the middle, the front does come in two pieces. So I've taped together the pattern already. That took forever. And now I just need to cut it out of the material. So there's one back piece and then two front pieces. Then the front pieces will be sewn together, except for that little gap, and then that little slit there can be hemmed. And then I guess we'll move on to the sleeves. I think it's a pretty quick construction of this bad boy. So let's go ahead and get started cutting out the materials and doing it. So you'll see here that I did go ahead and shorten the sleeve already, so I didn't have to waste fabric by cutting it out. So I shortened it and I just cut out two of those. Now the first thing that we're going to do to sew this whole thing together is we're going to take the two front pieces of this shirt and we're going to sew it all the way down the front except for that little gap at the top, and that's going to be our opening. And then the edges of the gap at the top get folded over twice to encase the seam. Now we can sew the front bodice piece onto the back bodice piece down the sides. Now for the arm, instead of making an elastic channel, I'm just going to sew the elastic straight on to the sleeve. So how I'm doing this is I'm measuring an elastic strip about the length that I want it to be for my arm, and then I'm just going to stretch while I sew with a zigzag stitch so that it will be elastic and it's just all done and put on there. Then once I've sewn that elastic piece onto both of the sleeves, I can go ahead and place them right sides together and sew down the side. After that, the sleeve can be hemmed. And now it's time to place the sleeve onto the bodice, so you're just going to put it right sides together and sew along that big U. And I did encase most of these seams on here as well, down the sides and around the armhole. After the sleeve is put on, I made a really small hem for the top of the bodice around the whole front and back and arms of the top. Now it's time to make the casing for the elastic or for the drawstring, whichever you're doing. So you just make a big strip basically, and then what you're going to do is you're going to iron in two of the sides, and then that gets placed around the inside of the bodice, and you just sew along the top and the bottom of the casing. After that, the elastic, which I'm doing rather than a drawstring, gets put in. So I'm just going to measure an elastic to fit around my shoulders because that is where I want this to sit. So I'm going to feed it through and then sew it down the ends where the gap is in the front of the bodice. Now to make this look like a drawstring top and to make a functional tie, I'm just going to cut out two little strips, sew them right sides together and turn it right sides out, and then I'm just going to sew it straight on to the inside right where the elastic is, and this is almost done. Now the last thing to do for this is to hem it, and then we are ready for the final look. I think this turned out so cute. I will say it took a very long time, so if you want to do something like this, be ready for it to take forever. But I think the corset turned out really great. I did have to do some adjustment in the straps. They needed to be just a little bit shorter, so I fixed that. Easy fix. You can't really tell that I did anything. Fantastic. The shirt pattern turned out fantastically. The only issue is I wish that the upper like shoulder parts and upper body parts were a little bit bigger, personally, so that I can have more ruffle, because if you'll see in the back and the arms, there's not really a ruffle right here. So I think if I added a bit more material, it would have been a lot better and a lot rufflier. But this is very like hobbity core, cottage core, definitely a run fair option. So I think this is gonna be a really great one in my arsenal. And it's just so pretty. Like, look at all the patchwork. I really love how this shirt works with it as well. It kind of gives me like piratey vibes. So I think this is something I would wear with like maybe one of my other pirate looks as well. So this can be used in other places. But yeah, I think if you're gonna do this, I would recommend like cottons, because those sew together the best, like when you're making a quilted blanket or something. So like if you would like to use like scrap material, fantastic project, but make sure the materials are about the same material, otherwise you're gonna have some sizing issues, I believe. But do it. I think this is just in time because the new Rings of Power show just came out. So I'm in a very Lord of the Rings mood right now, very hobbity mood. Yeah, I feel like going and baking some bread in this, or like a pie or something. This is just the vibe. Let me know what you liked and what you want to see more of. So, anywho to do, if you like what I did, go and like and subscribe. I post most Saturdays, mostly at noon, and I will see you in my next video. Thank you for watching!